Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who contributed in the chat. It's so great to see a range of folks in the room and great to see what brings you here today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself and kick things off, and then we'll dive right in. My name is Apeksha Gunawardena, and I work as a product manager with our League of Innovative Schools team at Digital Promise. And I will be passing things on to my colleague Quinn Burke shortly for the rest of the webinar, but I want to go ahead and walk through today's agenda with you all and then briefly share a little bit more about Digital Promise. So for today's agenda, we're excited to share information about our new Computing Pathways Toolkit, which was designed for school districts to support them with developing and articulating a learning pathway that's system-wide through K-12 around computational thinking and computer science. So we'll be sharing information about this toolkit. And in addition to that, we'll also be sharing some details about an exciting piloting opportunity for districts that are looking forward to advancing their work in computational thinking and computer science. So please stay tuned for that. We have been really lucky thus far to work with a set of core districts, and so you'll be able to hear from those 3 districts today during our district panel discussion, and then we'll have some time at the very end for a Q&A. Before we dive into the toolkit, I'm going to go ahead and share some information about Digital Promise for those who may be unfamiliar with our work. So at Digital Promise, we work at the intersection of educational leaders, researchers, and developers to support all students and to work to close the digital learning gap. As a part of that work, that includes working with a network of educators around shared challenges. We also work to increase research around the design, development, and implementation of educational products and programs. And then most importantly, we work to share tools and resources widely to help us scale innovation, which includes our Computing Pathways Toolkit. So much a part of our work is our networks, and we're lucky to have 3 strong networks: the League of Innovative Schools, the Verizon Innovative Learning Schools, and then finally the Education Innovation Clusters. And the 3 districts that you'll be hearing from today are actually a part of our League of Innovative Schools, and we're critical to the development of our Computing Pathways Toolkit. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it along to my colleague Quinn Burke, who's going to walk you through our toolkit.
Hey everyone, my name is Quinn Burke. I'm a senior research scientist here at Digital Promise, and I've been intimately involved with the development of this CT Pathways Toolkit for the last 2.5 years. So what we're sharing today represents 2.5 years work in the making. What I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about the big picture overview of the toolkit itself. And then I really want to use a big chunk of today to really get to our panelists. We have 3 true leaders on the call: Adam Kurth from Iowa City Schools, Brooke Morgan from Talladega County Schools, and Brian Giovanni from Indian Prairie School Districts. And they're going to talk about their experience developing their own CT pathways and talk about both the opportunities and the challenges associated with this type of work. If we can go to the next slide. So there's 3 components of the toolkit itself, and my questions for Brian and Adam and Brooke are going to follow these 3 components as well. I think some folks on the line know, and we have a really nice diverse group of folks here with us today, but this was based off of a 3-year grant with the National Science Foundation, which has come to recognize that it's not enough simply to have one-off courses on the high school or after-school programs on the middle school level. What we really need is K-12 comprehensive pathways that are competency focused and they're cumulative. And that word cumulative is important. It means that the work builds upon each other, and that, from elementary into middle school, you're going to see wider gains around these competencies. But first part of the toolkit, step 1 of the toolkit, is what we call the articulating the why. This is a crucial start. Why are we doing this? How does this align to the school, the district's initial vision? You'll take a look over there. One of the activities we do at this point in time is looking at something called CS Visions. What are the values and the impact areas? Oftentimes economic factors are brought up at this point in time, and the notion that we have to train kids for jobs that are out there that are not being filled But there's also this wider question of literacy, school reform. This is where the team gets together and articulates this overall alignment and begins to sort of think about how this mixes in with the district's already vision and the goals for the district going forward. And so it represents a crucial first step. We go right over to step two. Step two for us, and when we were working with our three core districts, Brian, Adam, and Brooke, was really unpacking what we meant by computational thinking. I think a lot of us use the term computational thinking. I certainly know that the term is used quite a bit around me, and we're not always quite sure what we are meaning when we say CT. Is CT a standalone class? Is CT something we integrate into other subjects like math, English language arts, social studies, science? One of the big priorities that we've focused on with the development of the toolkit is really unpacking CT and putting it into a discrete series of competencies. You'll see the image on the screen here, notions of creating algorithms, working with data, understanding systems, and creating computational models. By focusing on discrete competencies, districts have a greater opportunity to find integration points and communicate the idea to teachers. Simply going to teachers and saying, we want you to do computational thinking is not enough. That's one thing we've learned over 2.5 years of this grant. You need to be able to go to teachers and school leaders and be able to say, here's the importance of computational modeling. And this is why this can be integrated into your science coursework or to a social studies lesson. When we start talking in terms of competencies, we have found that teachers are much more inclined to understand the overall purpose, as well as be able to see how this is already work that they've started to do with their own teaching and can further accentuate it. So that's step two, the communicating the what is a crucial second step. And we'll go over to step three now. Finally, perhaps the biggest step is once we have got the vision, and the district has made some decisions about why they're doing this and why it aligns with the current initiatives they already have in place. Once they've determined what the competencies are that they want to focus on, oftentimes informed by state academic standards in technology, literacy, and computer science, we get to this wider question of the how. And this is a continuation of the inventory you're taking in step two, but who are the crucial next step players that you want to bring on board? These are teachers, they're school leaders. Who are the folks who are already doing this with individual coursework within your district? How do we bring them on board? And then also, how do we assess? What does success look like? At this point in time, after you get through the why and the what, you open it up to a wider team of teachers and leaders across schools and across classrooms, and trying to kind of consider how these different competencies can be rolled out. And then going back to that notion of cumulativity, how do they build upon each other? How does it stretch across grade bands? And that's that third key next step. We move along. So for the purposes of what we are doing today with the launch, the process that I just described relatively briefly was 1 year with our three core districts. We dedicated a year to do that. And the second year, the grant was refining and really kind of getting it in place and then working on that third component of the how and refining things accordingly. For the purposes of folks who are on the line right now, we want you to follow 3 steps. We want you to look at the toolkit itself, and we'll be following up. If you already haven't received the URL itself, we'll be posting that here and then getting it out to you with a follow-up email. And looking at these elements of why, what, and how. Step 2, every district, every school, individuals are unique. What are the components of the toolkit that are particularly useful to your own development of a K-12 pathway? And districts are in very different places here. So pulling out the key components that mean something to your district is that second step. And then step 3, apply for stipends. We want to work with districts this spring. Commencing in January, we want to use that 6-month period up to June to really have you individually go through this with your respective teams and begin to investigate the toolkit, begin to play with it, begin to sample pieces of, and begin to collect data on the why, what, and the how within your own schools and with your own classrooms. To that end, we are going to support teams of anywhere from 8 to 12 teachers / administrators We want these teams to be from a range of grade levels as well as backgrounds. Some folks might be people who already had experience offering computational thinking or computer science. Other folks may be literacy, or folks who focus more on diversity and reaching a range of populations. So we want to see 8 to 12 team members. And we want to see these meetings at least an hour a month, plus anywhere from 1 to 2 hours homework monthly. One thing that we've noticed, and I think Adam, Brooke, and Brian are going to be able to speak to this much better than I can, but coming to these meetings having read, coming to these meetings having investigated, and coming to the table saying, hey, this is what I'm noticing, and then exchanging ideas accordingly. So one of the things that we really are committed is to put that 1 to 2 hours of homework monthly. So when you have these meetings with your core teams, you're really able to have lively and rich conversations that build upon each other as you move from January into February into March, so on. We'll go to the next slide. So at this point in time, I'm going to stop and I'm going to kind of open this up to, first of all, I'm going to introduce our 3 panelists again. But as we move forward, I have some established questions to get the ball rolling with Brian, Brooke, and Adam. But as questions arise, we also want to encourage people to make use of the chat, as many of you already have, to bring up some of the questions that may emerge as you hear them speak. We'll go to the next slide. So without further ado, we have 3 here. Dr. Brooke Morgan, as I said, from Talladega County Schools. Mr. Adam Kurth, who directs technology and innovation with Iowa City. And of course, Mr. Brian Giovanni, who directs innovation at Indian Prairie School District in Illinois. I just want to thank Brian, Adam, and Brooke for being with us again today, and look forward to the conversation we're going to have. If we can go to the next slide. Before we open it up, I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of each of these districts. And of course, Brian, Adam, and Brooke can speak more to their own districts. But you know, one of the things we really did want to do with our districts is try to work with a range. So you can see that all 3 districts are of various sizes and had different challenges in terms of equity and building out computer science education with a particular focus on inclusivity, which is underpinning the toolkit itself. So I'll give everyone a minute just to take a look at that. And when we initially were able to connect with Adam, Brooke, and Brian, these were factors that we were very much considering and were very important to us on this NSF grant. Let me go to the next slide, and then I'm going to stop talking and open it up for some questions. The one thing I wanted to point to, and I'm highlighting some of Brooke's work here, when we initially connected with all 3 districts, one of the big things was trying to figure out what your inclusivity challenge was, especially around computational thinking, computer science. This is from Talladega's application, which I clearly remember reading at the time and being very impressed. And one of the things that Talladega wants to do, among other things, is try to really make sure we get more students from lower socioeconomic households, and frankly, more females into the coursework. Talladega has some rich coursework on the high school level, but one of the things that Brooke has done tremendous work on is really making sure that the K-8 offerings are available to students earlier, so that by the time kids get to high school, they already have some of their bearings and are going to be enrolling in these classes because they already know what computational thinking is. They know what computer science is. They're not intimidated by the word algorithm. And so going forward, this is also worth noting that as you begin to identify your own challenges and reasons for potentially participating with us on the toolkit, this is a good example of trying to think about what the current challenges of your own schools, your own districts, your own students, families are, and being able to incorporate that over the next 6 months. Let's go to the next slide. So at this point in time, I am going to stop talking as much and kind of be able to open it up to Brian, Adam, and Brooke. As I said, please place questions in the chat. You know, getting your own sense of things and getting you know, what questions you may have will be important. But I wanted to open this up, going back to those 3 original slides around the why, the how, the what, and the how. So the first question I'm going to ask Brian and Adam or Brooke, and feel free to kind of popcorn off each other here, but can you talk about your district's reason for this work? I just shared Brooke's slide for Talladega, but when you decided that you wanted to develop comprehensive K-12 pathways in CT, what was the fundamental underlying reason for your own district?
Hi, Quinn. Um, we had been we had several initiatives going on in our district revolving PBL and also STEAM, and we were really looking at the engineering design process. And the reason for that really is because our state, we were seeing a really big increase in STEM jobs in our state. And we'd actually read a report that said we would increase by 20 more percent by the year 2024. And so we knew that we had to make sure our students were prepared for those new jobs and that new workforce. And so in addition to that, our state had just released a new digital computing course of study. And also NGSS came around that time, the new science standards. And, when we examined those standards, we realized that those practices were embedded in those standards. Students were going to have to know how to apply different ways of solving problems in different contexts. And so to us, it just made sense that this would be a logical next step for us because we could see pockets of this happening in our district, but we did not have a pathway. We did not have a common vocabulary, K-12. And that was really, I think, what started our process. Just it was kind of a convergence of a lot of things, and it was just a logical next step to go ahead and look at that from a K-12 perspective.
That's really helpful. Brian or Adam?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
We highlighted a lot of things that Brooke just mentioned in what she's talking about being a core skill for one specific thing that she was talking about where it was happening in pockets within the district. We also saw it happening within pockets of a school where students were gravitating towards these skills and really kind of gravitating toward it and having some interest in it. We thought it was a really important skill for all as we started to research and look at the changing needs and dynamics of the ever-changing workforce. And no matter what career a student would eventually engage in, whether the specific job had been created or not, they were going to have to engage in these skills and competencies, or at least literacies, at some point in their career journey. So we thought it was really, really important that all of our students, and really targeting our Title I buildings and some of our students who may not have been introduced or initially gravitating towards these ideas. So those are some of the ideas that we started with our why.
Thanks, Brian.
And I won't repeat everything that Brooke and Brian just said, and I agree with all of that. And those were a lot of our motivators as well. Another one that I would share is that in our community, we have a pretty strong biomedical engineering industry. And we had reached a point where we were getting a lot of interest on the part of industry partners in working with us to improve our basically STEM, but you can conceptualize it in multiple ways. And we actually like the way it fits within the CT definition. But we're getting a lot of offers for industry involvement in our classrooms. And, because we didn't have, a solid CT or CS or engineering program in place K-12, we had difficulty determining how we were going to structure our support of that involvement and how we were going to make sure it was equitable. And so that drove some of our work as well, along with those factors that Brooke and Brian shared.
Thanks, Adam. And we don't have to go in any particular order here, but I want to pick up something that Brian mentioned with this notion of pockets. He said in Indian Prairie, we saw pockets. This was going on. We had some coursework on the high school level. We had some after school programs. Hour of Code was going on a little bit here and there, but they weren't consistent pockets. So and that kind of cues up the second question about this notion of sort of what it was like to take an inventory. And then, alongside that inventory piece, put together a team. All of you already have teams in multiple areas as leaders within your district. But could you talk about what it was to put a team together here and then talk about this element of inventory and trying to get these different pockets to come together?
I can start out on that one. We when we were looking at what we were doing, much like what Brian shared, we had these pockets where this was where CS implementation was happening in the classroom, and it was really great, and they were doing, innovative things. But it was just one classroom or one school here or there, and it certainly wasn't across the district. And so one of the very first things that we did when we got involved in this work was to identify who those individuals are. And that included district level leadership, it included some building level leadership, and it included teachers in our classrooms, especially at the elementary level, which is where we had more of an issue with the pocket situation than we had at the other levels. But we really identified those people who would have knowledge about what was actually being delivered in the classroom. And we brought that together as our initial group that started to define our reality. We actually did that even, prior to applying to be involved in this grant work. That was something that we saw as critical if we were going to pursue implementation of computational thinking broadly in a standardized way. We needed to know what was going on. So that was step number one.
Thanks, Adam.
For our team, we took a look at our district C&I team to really engage in the conversation and take an audit of kind of where we were across the district. We have a good lens of kind of what's happening in our buildings and working with different groups. And we used the script to kind of really engage in that conversation and looking at different parts of the rubric. And that was initially came from the computer science as well. One of the things that I know we'll get to lessons learned eventually, but as Adam mentioned, the group that he brought, we probably should have brought some building leaders into that conversation because they really drive the instruction at a building and really help make change or at least have conversations in their building leadership teams and just professional learning, stuff like that. I think that would have been one of the things that would have helped us kind of move the step forward a little faster. But that's how we started, and the initial step was to get our team together on talking the same language and really engaging in some activities that got CT highlighted and talking about what are these competencies and how do they connect to what we're doing to help student learning.
Hi, we also use the script tool. We had an established group in our district we call Experts Down the Hall. And these were a group of teacher leaders from each of our schools. We have 17 schools, so all of our schools were represented. And it was really eye-opening having those conversations around the script and looking to see where we fell on that rubric because we were all over the place. We had some teacher leaders from some schools who felt like they were doing a great job in a lot of areas. And then we had some who saw a lot of need for improvement. So I think it was great having those conversations and just holistically looking, if we want our district to move forward to where we are all on the same page, what needs to happen. And another group that was really instrumental in this work was our DLPs, our digital learning coaches, and they were involved in this work as well. So we essentially had 2 individuals in every school building doing this work, which I think was really key into moving it in a district-wide focus like we did. We didn't, choose one school or one grade band to pilot. We went all in, and we wanted the same expectations in all of our schools at all of our grade bands.
That's really helpful. And because Brooke, you mentioned it, but Brian, it's just worth saying what the script is. The script is an acronym. It's a program that's included within the toolkit, came to us in partnership with CS for All, called the Strategic CS for All Research and Implementation Planning Tool. So it's a mouthful, but it's that first step of trying to figure out why you're doing this, but then also taking that inventory and saying, where are we at in terms of curricula? Where are we at in terms of teachers? Where is our families and our students with this kind of content? And then, as Brooke mentioned too, this wider issue of economic opportunity in the wider community is something that the script also tries to gauge. Listen, there's a question that jumped up in the chat, and I think it's worthwhile to kind of go over to it right now. And I appreciate Mary Ellen Sherman asking this question. I think it's appropriate because one of the things that happens as you're sort of trying to articulate a pathway is going to state academic standards. And obviously schools school leaders and teachers speak and think in terms of academic standards. Brian, I'm going to kind of go to you on this one. Iowa City had standards developed pretty closely alongside the Computer Science Teachers Association. Alabama had standards right at the time that we were all initially connecting 2.5 years ago, Brooke. But Illinois did not have computer science standards, Brian. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that first year, and whereas Brooke and Brian, Adam were able to sort of go right to state standards. I think you had to spend a little bit more time with your team kind of really unpacking things. So what was that process like?
I would agree that was one of the things that we did struggle with to get started in this work of how do we unpack it and where do we go and what does that look like? And we ended up going to build some ideas based on combining them with CSTA. Really gave us some of the language that we really needed, and to help us build some of these ideas of that pathway for K-12, actually pre-K all the way through 12, and what that looks like, and helped us build that continuum. Because when we were just trying to build it upon ourselves, we were missing a few spots, but that language from CSTA really helped us. And I know the question that came in there was about building a standards-based practice. We've kind of taken it on the idea of competencies, and we've done portrait of a graduate as well as the district to kind of give us that vision for who we are. We're not necessarily using it as a standards-based approach, but these are some of the competencies and skills that students need in a career that they choose. And we've connected that work to our portrait of a graduate as this is a pathway to multiple portraits of a graduate competence. So we've kind of looked at that as being the sequence to hit those competencies that our community has identified as essential for students to leave our K-12 continuum with.
And I'm kind of plugging here, Brian, so excuse me, but Brian brought Portrait to Graduate to us, and that's something that we've included deliberately within the toolkit as well, saying that this is what matters for our district, and putting that computational thinking, computer science component within that portrait itself was a way to communicate that across Indian Prairie, which was the largest of the districts. And so that I think was a key piece. Adam and Brooke, I'll kind of keep that open for you too in terms of standards, but also I realize there was a second part to the question itself in terms of helping students kind of catch up. And I don't know if Adam or Brooke, you can speak either anecdotally with an example, or talk a bit about what it has been now that we're 2.5 years in on this grant to see students getting more opportunities and potentially getting these opportunities at an earlier age prior to high school in and around CT and CS.
Well, I can speak to that a little bit. Our part of our pathways, we made sure to include any standards, especially our digital literacy and computer science standards. They're listed. And then we also had a column for what would this look like in the classroom. And so we actually broke it down to the different content areas on, how this particular standard around algorithmic thinking could apply to reading, at the first grade level, or how it would apply to a math lesson. And our work has really been evolving over the past 2.5 years. And our task now, just so we can kind of house everything in one place, we have standards maps for each of our grade levels. And so we are now linking these computational thinking lessons into our standards maps. So if, for example, there's a science standard that requires data analysis, then we will link a lesson that they can do for their students on how to collect data in a Google Sheet and how to then analyze that data through charts and graphs and that sort of thing. So we're trying to link that so that it's all in one place, so that the teachers aren't having to look at different resources to pull that. We're trying to do that back end work for them to help them save time and to see that connection, and why it's important to have those opportunities for students to really dig into the data in order to reach that standard in science.
Let me pick up off of that, Brooke. With the notion of you get the why, if I'm a district, I say, yeah, I know why we want to do this, and we have consensus, and we've been able to figure out how this aligns with some of our current initiatives. So we feel like we can go to our teachers and without this just being something else for teachers to do, because as everyone well knows right now, teachers are already feeling pretty put upon with some of the challenges that we've been faced with over the last, 9 months. I got the why. I'm able to define computational thinking into a series of competencies, and picking up a Brooks point, I began to go to our teachers. We've developed a document, which all of you have done, that articulates the standard, defines it, and gives classroom teachers opportunities to integrate it on the K-8 level, and how it can actually lead up to high school coursework. So I've got that going. I guess one of the questions, and this actually kind of comes in with the chat as well. Anthony White had a question, and I'm going to read this out loud. As a teacher who's passionate about this, so he believes in it, he works in a district that does not have any existing CS classes, including high school. How do I go about doing this and make this a reality across the district? It's a big, broad question, but I've defined, you have a why, and we have a general sense of what. I guess this kind of leads us to the third question of the how. How do you actually begin to roll this out?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. And I know that each of our districts, our how is going to be a little different. And I think that that's, maybe an advantage to how this toolkit was constructed, is I think it reflects a variety of ways that you can approach this. But I'll share that one of our challenges when we got started with this work was identifying where this was going to fit in. Especially, and you can speak, I feel like it's a different conversation whether you're speaking about secondary or specifically high school versus elementary. But I can say that with our elementary schedule, we had very little flexibility. We didn't have the ability to just add in a computer science special or something like that. And what we found is that actually at our schools that had the greatest, the greatest number of students who were structurally disadvantaged, it created even more of a problem, because those buildings were generally devoting more time to reading recovery or math recovery type work. And there was less time even to incorporate additional content. And so we really looked at sort of what's the low-hanging fruit here? What can we do that's going to be going to have the least disruptive impact from a structural perspective? We might want to be disruptive in terms of getting kids exposure, but what's going to impact our actual schedules the least? And so we looked at delivery of computational thinking competencies along with existing curricular areas. So we chose as our primary way to integrate CS and CT, we chose science. We looked for and we identified, and this is addressed in the toolkit, but in our competencies document development, we did identify ways for teachers to integrate CT and other curricular areas as well, but we really identified science. In our case, we went out and we found curriculum that was aligned to both NGSS and to CSTA, which the state of Iowa uses as our CS standards. And that allowed us to integrate computer science and to integrate these CT competency areas without carving out another piece of the schedule. And that made it a much more palatable move for the buildings that we piloted at, because they didn't need to do something weird with their schedule or figure out how they were going to do with even less time for science or social studies or specials areas. And that was something that was attainable for us, but accomplishes our goal of ensuring that every single student is being exposed to this content.
Appreciate that, Adam. And I want to point out, for Brooke and Talladega, it was rolling out across multiple subjects, and that's still a priority for Iowa City. But as Adam points out, science became a big integration point, especially on that K-8, and that was a decision. But the pathway is going to be different for the districts. Iowa City is also twice the size as Talladega, so size and these other factors of scheduling all come into play. Anyway, Brian or Brooke, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about kind of getting that final piece to how rolled out.
Yeah, I think the how was, the thing that's going to take you the longest. And really, we in our district, we generally do more of an organic approach and really get some professional learning and kind of go at it where teachers really feel confident and then start to implement it. And we are looking to integrate it across multiple disciplines, especially at the K-5 level, to make sure that where we see connections and where it makes sense, we highlight those competencies. And we've also talked a little bit about, we've seen some examples, and I don't know if this is the best way to do it or not, but we have seen some examples in other districts around us who have highlighted STEM in a series of 5 to 10 lessons to just kind of help teachers kind of jumpstart the conversation a little bit. So they may not be experts, but using somebody in their building who is more of an expert to partner with that teacher and kind of get the ball rolling, so then teacher can see it in action and continue to use that language. And once they see those ideas or examples, now they can spot those lessons where, oh, if I do this thing to connect to my lesson, I can really highlight computational thinking. It's nothing new. It's nothing completely different. To Adam's point about, a huge disruption where sometimes you might want to disrupt. Well, this just trying to go at it at an easier pace so it didn't seem so overwhelming. And it also helped us address the time factor, because we know our K-5 teachers are the jack of all trades and have a lot of things to cover over the course of the day. So coming in with the idea that this is one extra thing wasn't going to be sustainable for us. So we had to look at it like how Adam was talking about. How can we connect to some of our current work, really highlight these competencies for all of our students?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that's exactly what we had to do because, teachers, they're stressed and we wanted to they wanted to make sure that they understood that they were already doing a lot of this work already. They just didn't realize it. And they weren't really bringing attention to the vocabulary and making students aware of what they were doing in these lessons. And so one of the great things I think that we did is we started off with just kind of an overview of, what is computational thinking? Why should we make sure that our students have these opportunities across the curriculum? And from there, we did a deep dive. So we chose first, we're going to just really look at the data piece because we saw that was so prevalent in the science standards and in the math standards. And we wanted to make sure that our teachers had a firm understanding of what the standards actually said. So we really spent some time breaking down the standards, looking at what it was asking students to be able to do. And then we actually had our teacher leaders experience those lessons as a student so that they could really internalize, oh, this is what it means for algorithmic thinking, or this is what data analysis should really look like and sound like in the classroom. And there was a lot of aha moments for our teachers, and they understood the importance of having some productive struggle and of going through a step-by-step process to solve a problem. And I think that made it really more real for them, especially when they were planning their lessons, and to make sure that students really had a firm understanding of why they were doing what they were doing. And so once teachers were able to experience that themselves, it became a lot easier for them to have those conversations with colleagues about the importance. And that's how we were able to really spread the work throughout the school, because these teacher leaders actually did that turnaround training with the teachers in their own buildings. And so they really owned it. It wasn't like somebody from the outside coming in saying, hey, this is what you need to do and this is how you do it. It was actually them leading the learning in their school, where they were all realizing themselves what needed to happen in their classrooms to make sure that students were really prepared for those new jobs and for that new way of thinking and how to apply what they learned across all content areas and in other situations in their lives.
Really helpful. And I like the way you term it too, but this notion of productive struggle. But if teachers are able to do that side by side, and what are you not getting, or what am I getting, and have really open, genuine conversations about that, I think, as you said, a lot more will tend to take hold. Listen, I wanted to pull back, and Brian touched upon this earlier, but of course, there's always this question of lessons learned. As I say, we're about 2.5 years in now on this So wanted to have each of you talk about one or two lessons that you feel like you really have learned or gained in that time period in terms of just the process and putting teams together and getting this kind of commitment from your districts.
I can start. There's three that I really wrote down to kind of that I think as I reflected on the past 2.5 years that kind of look back on it. One, to really make the pathway digestible and not too overwhelming. I think that when our teachers have looked at it initially, they've reacted positively to it, like, oh, this is manageable, I can get this. But there were parts that maybe was a little much. And so just making it digestible and look similar to other things that they do or interact with, whether, for example, for our curriculum and instruction, we use Atlas. So just having it in somewhat of a familiar format is helpful. The other one is, Brooke highlighted this, the examples early, not only just highlighting what algorithms is, but what does it look like in practice like they get it, but then what does it look like for a fifth grader or a third grader, and connecting it to some of their current instructional practices. We didn't do that soon enough. And I think that's something that if we were to go back in, we would have injected that earlier and more often. And then the last one is the pre-K through second grade lens. I think we would have highlighted that a little bit more and there's some unique opportunities there that we could have taken more advantage of, because they use a lot of those terms already, especially decomposition and pattern recognition. I think there could have been some opportunities where we could have highlighted that work to help us move forward a little quicker as well.
I would just say that a big lesson for us was trust your teachers, trust the leaders doing this work, because they were phenomenal. I mean, you get them in a group, especially some of these high achieving teachers, and you get them in a group together, and it's amazing what they can accomplish. We had to prioritize this work, and that's advice I would give to anyone. We had our superintendent, deputy superintendent, everybody was 100% behind this. And, they wanted me to always make sure that all the administrators at the school level, they were in the loop. And so, every month when we met, we talked about this. They received the same awareness training that the teacher leaders did. So we wanted to make sure that we communicated it frequently, and that we had a common, I've said this before, a common definition for what we were trying to do. And we had identified 5 key competencies, and we wanted to make sure that everybody understood what those competencies were and how we were actually teaching those in the classrooms. One thing that I wish we had done sooner was survey students, just about not only their mindset around these different practices, but to try to get an understanding of, did this particular strategy help you? What else helped you, to learn how to solve this problem, that sort of thing. That's something that we're kind of trying to do now. And I wish we had some data to really compare it to from earlier on. So that would just be an area I think that I wish we had spent more time, is really talking and maybe interviewing some students prior to the beginning of this work.
I'm glad you said that, because there's a district who's on today who, when we had talked to them about a week ago about some of this, they said one of the big priorities for us is getting student voices early and helping that build things out. Same time, teachers and administrators are doing script, get those student voices in place. That's helpful. Adam?
Yeah, both Brooke and Brian mentioned communication. That's the thing that I would really identify as our key lesson learned, is that, we didn't get in front of as much as I wish we had, communicating out what this project was, what the goals were, how it was going to impact classrooms, to the extent that I think we needed to, in order to get a deeper level of buy-in on the part of teachers and principals. So we always had, from the very beginning, we had certain key individuals and groups that were closely involved with the work that we were doing, and they knew what CT was, and they knew about our work with Digital Promise, and they knew how we were defining it, and they knew what we were trying to implement in the classrooms and what the long-term goals were. What we didn't do is we didn't communicate out broadly, here's the goal for the district, here's our K-12 pathway, and here's why it's going to matter. So, we were a year and a half in. I was having a conversation with a couple of high school computer science teachers, and I realized that, I was assuming that they knew about the work that we were doing at the elementary level, but we hadn't explicitly communicated it enough, so they weren't actually aware of that. That wasn't something that they were considering as we had our conversation about where we needed to go with our computer science elective coursework at the high school level. Just one example, but it's kind of across the board. We just didn't communicate out. And that probably goes hand in hand with, not making it enough of a priority within our district. And that speaks to the second lesson learned that I would share, which is, making clear where this fits in. All districts have multiple initiatives that they're juggling at all times. And so where does this one fit in, and how is it complementary? Whether that's, we have portrait of a graduate, and everything is building to that, and we know exactly where everything slots in based upon those portrait goals, or whether it's something where we've identified these as our 3 priorities for this year. Making sure that people are aware where the work fits in. In our case, a big driver was equity. And that's something that, again, by not being explicit enough in our communications, we had to kind of circle back with people and explain to people how our work in computational thinking integration, grades K through 8, was designed to create more equitable outcomes for our students. That's an important conversation to have, but it's one that would have been better had right off the bat. And I think would have made it a little bit easier to engage in the implementation portion of the work that we've done to this point.
Thanks, Adam. And I'm glad you brought up that notion of inclusion and equity. I think one of the biggest challenges with computer science education is that there's still just this general perception that it's meant for a very select few, and that kids come onto the world just having the ability to do it or not to have the ability to do it. So I appreciate that point here too. Listen, I'm mindful of time, and I know that we want to cut at 5 before the hour. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank all 3 of you again. And I mean this quite genuinely too. As I said, with the days of this pandemic, it's been an incredible challenge. And so Brian, Adam, and Brooke have not only been managing what is a very ambitious project with their own respective toolkits and pathways, but also managing as technology directors for their districts, everything else that's going into remote and hybrid learning. So Brian, Adam, and Brooke have never missed a meeting. They're always just been so great to connect with. So I do want to kind of publicly thank all of you. And I think you all 3 know that, and how much Digital Promise has really appreciated working with you. Brian, Brooke, and Adam are experts here. I mean, I think a lot of times when technology leads or leaders are told that they need to get computational thinking or computer science education in place, they say, well, I'm just going to go outsource this, and I'm going to go to code.org, or maybe there's some quick workbooks I could buy. One of the things we're really trying to do with the pathways, Brooke, I'm going to go back to your terminology of productive struggle. This is work. It's not easy, but it does get traction if you do it. And if you really bring together committed team members and you take the time to walk through it and define it and figure that why, figure out the what, and really spend time trying to figure out the how. And to Brian's point, recognize that there's going to be some bumps and there's going to be lessons learned, as all 3 of our panelists shared. Please reach out to Brian, Adam, and Brooke. They can talk to you about what these challenges are. They can also, I think, connect with you on where your own individual schools, teachers, and districts are at. And give you that firsthand experience, which I think is very unique here. If we could just go to the next slide. To put a cap on things, if this is interesting to you, Anthony White, who's a teacher who's on the line, said, I'm going to go have a conversation after this webinar. That's what we want you to do. We want you to go talk to people, even if you're not able to physically talk to people. Get online with folks, connect by phone and say, hey, is this something our district, is this something our schools really want to do? And what is our bandwidth? Can we commit to this type of work? If that is interesting to you, you're going to get everyone here is going to get a follow-up email tomorrow And one of the things we'll have is the slide deck from today. We'll also have a video of today's session. But then the last thing we're also going to have is an application. And that'll be 6 short questions saying, hey, where are you at with things? Do you think this is something that you want to commit to? Is this something of interest? Tell us more about your district. Tell us about what your own challenges are. Tell us what you already have going on. There's a number of folks who I know are on the line who are already doing some great work around computational thinking and computer science. But going back to that term that Brian used earlier, they're pockets. How do we get the pockets connected? How do we make this more seamless? How do we see this as a sort of major through lines? At any rate, I just want to thank our panelists again and thank the wider Digital Promise team who helps put together these webinars in such seamless ways. And thanks for everyone for getting on. This is sort of a busy month in particular as we sit between the holidays. So do appreciate everyone getting on today, and keep your eyes out for an email tomorrow and we will go from there. I hope everyone has a good rest of their Monday.